Help us hit our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support drives us to create even more wonderful stories. Thanks for being part of our journey. Daniel had always believed in his wife, Brooke. She was brilliant, sharp-tongued, and had a knack for solving problems no one else could. But for years, she'd remained in the same mid-level position at her tech company, passed over time and time again for promotions she deserved. So when she came home one Friday evening, eyes gleaming and voice trembling with excitement, Daniel felt nothing but pride. "I got promoted," she whispered, holding back tears, "to executive director." Daniel leapt up from the couch, pulling her into a hug so tight it made her laugh. They opened a bottle of wine that night, the good one they had been saving for someday. Brooke said her new responsibilities would be intense. Late meetings, more travel, high-pressure decisions. Daniel didn't mind. He was ready to support her. But things began changing. Quickly, within a week, Brooke started coming home later than usual. Sometimes it was just 30 minutes, then an hour, then two. She'd walk in exhausted, claiming she'd been in back-to-back client calls. Her phone never left her hand. She set it face down every time she placed it on the table, something she never used to do. One night, Daniel reached over to grab her phone by mistake. Thinking it was his, she snapped at him, sharp and cold. "That's mine." The chill in her voice made his skin crawl. He apologized, confused. Later, as they got into bed, she turned her back to him, scrolling silently in the dark. That's when the first flicker of doubt sparked in Daniel's mind. He told himself not to overthink it. She was just overwhelmed. The promotion was a big deal. But then came the moment that planted the real seed of suspicion. Daniel dropped by her office one afternoon to surprise her with lunch. He knew she loved the chicken salad from their favorite cafe. When he reached the front desk, the receptionist blinked at him. "Brooke left about 20 minutes ago," she said. "She said she had a client lunch downtown." Daniel smiled politely, thanked her, and walked out. But something twisted in his gut. He called her right away. She didn't answer. Later, when she returned his call, she sounded distracted. "Oh, yeah. I was just in a lunch meeting. Sorry I missed you." Daniel didn't mention that he had stopped by. He wanted to believe her, but that night, he stared at her across the dinner table, watching her laugh at her phone. He realized something had shifted, not just in her job, but in her, and somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "Something isn't right." 2 weeks after Brooke's promotion, she announced she had to travel to Chicago for a leadership summit. Daniel smiled, trying to hide the growing knot in his stomach. "Just for 3 days," she said, kissing his cheek. She didn't pack much, just one suitcase and her laptop, but she brought along her red dress, the one she never wore, the one he had bought her for their anniversary last year. She had said it was too flashy for work. Now, apparently it was perfect for a leadership conference. Daniel helped her load her suitcase into the Uber. He waved as it drove off, but the second she turned the corner, something inside him started to ache. He tried to distract himself, worked overtime, went to the gym, cooked dinner for one, but he kept thinking about that dress, and about the way she had smiled at her phone the night before. On the second day of her trip, Daniel called to check in. No answer. He waited an hour. Still nothing. Finally, she sent a text. "Busy all day? Babe, presentations non-stop. I'll call you later." But she didn't. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. So, out of impulse, he opened his laptop and searched the name of the hotel she told him she was staying at, the Westmark Tower. On the hotel's Instagram page, there were fresh stories, a big corporate event, laughter, cocktails, music, people in suits. Then one shot made his heart skip. A woman in the background, red dress, curly brown hair, turned away from the camera, speaking closely with a man in a dark blazer. Daniel zoomed in. It looked like her, felt like her, but he couldn't be sure. The next morning, she finally called, sounding tired, worn out, but happy. "The summit's been intense, but good," she said. Daniel asked her about the sessions. She hesitated. "Lots of leadership stuff, growth strategies, networking." He smiled faintly. "Did you get to wear that red dress?" There was a pause, then a laugh. "Oh yeah, just for the cocktail mixer." It was last minute. She was lying, he could tell. And now, the doubt was no longer a whisper. It was screaming. Brooke returned home late Sunday evening. She looked tired, but refreshed. Her smile was wide, too wide. She hugged Daniel tightly and said, "I missed you." But her perfume was different. It wasn't the soft floral scent she usually wore. It was stronger, more seductive, not something she ever wore around him. Daniel noticed immediately but didn't comment. He simply said, "You look amazing." She laughed and brushed past him to get her suitcase. That's when he saw it. Her suitcase. The zipper was slightly open, and inside, tucked between her clothes, was a gift bag. Small, navy blue, with silver tissue paper. It hadn't been there when she left. Daniel's pulse quickened. "What's that?" he asked casually. Brooke turned almost too quickly. "Oh, just a souvenir from the summit. A gift for attending." He nodded, but she didn't offer to show it, didn't even take it out of the suitcase. Later that night, after she fell asleep, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. His mind raced. He thought about the hotel Instagram story, the red dress, the man in the blazer, the perfume, the gift bag. Everything felt like puzzle pieces falling into place. Only the picture was one he didn't want to see. The next day, while Brooke was in the shower, Daniel checked her suitcase. The gift bag was gone, vanished, like it was never there. But he knew it was, and now he knew one more thing. She was hiding something. He just didn't know what yet, but he was going to find out. The next morning, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee in silence. Brooke was humming as she got ready for work. She seemed too cheerful for a Monday. As she walked past him, he asked, "What's the name of the guy who planned your summit again?" She paused for a moment, then smiled. "Oh, that would be Chase Bentley. He's from corporate." Daniel nodded slowly. He had never heard her mention Chase before. Not once. "And you two worked closely?" Brooke laughed. "Not really. Just emails and one brief meeting. He coordinated things with everyone." Daniel sipped his coffee again. This time, it tasted bitter. That name, Chase Bentley, it sounded too polished, too perfect. Later that day, when Brooke left for work, Daniel sat down with her laptop. She rarely locked it, and today was no exception. He opened her email, searched Chase Bentley. Dozens of emails appeared, but something stood out. They weren't just about logistics. One email subject read, "Last night was unforgettable." His heart pounded as he clicked. The message was short, but devastating. "I can still feel your perfume on my shirt. Last night was beyond what I imagined. Let's not wait for another summit to make memories." See, Daniel stared at the screen. The room spun. His hands trembled. He scrolled through more emails. Most were professional, but a few were flirty, subtle but there, and all signed with a simple C. Brooke never mentioned any of this. Not once. He felt like a stranger in his own life. The woman he loved was living a double life, and now he had proof. But what would he do next? Call her out? Or wait? Because deep inside, Daniel wasn't sure how far this went, and something told him it was just the beginning. Daniel didn't confront Brooke that night. He couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he played it calm. He acted normal, even smiled when she kissed him goodnight. But inside, something had broken. He lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Chase Bentley, the name repeated in his head like a curse. The email, the perfume on his shirt, Brooke's sudden work trips. Everything was connecting. But Daniel wasn't a man who acted out of rage. He was strategic. The next morning, after Brooke left for work, Daniel made a plan. He called in sick at his own job. Then he opened her laptop again. He took screenshots of every email, every message from Chase, every sign of betrayal. He saved them to a hidden folder on his own drive. Then he dug deeper. Calendar events, deleted messages. He even checked her synced iCloud photos. And that's when he found it. A picture. Brooke sitting too close to a man in a bar. She was laughing. Her hand was resting on his chest. It was blurry, probably taken late at night, but Daniel recognized the man. He had seen him once, at the company's holiday party. Tall, clean-cut, too charming. It was Chase. Daniel stared at the photo. This wasn't just flirting. This was physical. This was betrayal in its rawest form. He took a deep breath. Then he did something unexpected. He booked a meeting room at a hotel, the same hotel where Brooke said the summit had taken place. He requested security footage, said he lost a personal item during a previous stay. The receptionist was hesitant at first, but Daniel slipped her a small bribe, enough to get her attention. She checked, then offered to email the footage. Daniel thanked her and waited. Later that evening, he got the files. He opened them with shaking hands, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Brooke entering the hotel at night with Chase, not during the summit, but 2 days after it ended. She wasn't even supposed to be there. They walked in together, laughing, his hand on her lower back. They didn't check in. She already had a key. Daniel paused the footage as they disappeared into the elevator. Together, that was it. Proof. Undeniable. But still, he didn't say a word to Brooke. Not that night. He just smiled, asked her how work was. She said it was hectic but good, and he nodded, because Daniel wasn't done yet. He needed more than proof. He needed a plan, and when it unfolded, it would leave her speechless. And Chase? He had no idea what was coming. Daniel knew the hardest part wouldn't be gathering proof. It would be staying silent, pretending, smiling at the woman who shattered his heart. But he wasn't ready to explode yet. He wanted the ending to hurt just as much as the betrayal. So he waited, carefully, patiently. The next morning, Daniel left for work early. Or at least that's what he told Brooke. In reality, he drove across town, to a small coffee shop near Chase Bentley's apartment building. He had tracked down the address the night before. It wasn't hard. Chase's LinkedIn, company profiles, even a few photos Brooke had accidentally geotagged. Daniel knew where he lived, and he knew where to watch. From the cafe window, Daniel waited. 2 hours passed. Finally, around 9:10 a.m. Chase exited the building. He was on the phone, laughing, confident, unaware that his life was about to unravel. Daniel followed him. Just for a while.
No confrontation.
Not yet. He just needed to confirm something. Chase walked 3 blocks to a high-end florist. He left with a small bouquet, white lilies and soft pink roses. Daniel memorized the ribbon. He'd seen that exact bouquet before, 2 months ago, on Brooke's nightstand. She had said it was from a client. Daniel almost laughed at the memory. Then he drove back, straight to the office where Brooke and Chase worked. It was a mid-sized tech startup. Sleek, open spaces, glass conference rooms. Daniel waited in his car, watched as Chase entered the building, bouquet in hand. Daniel clenched his jaw. That confirmed it. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, romantic. They were celebrating something. Daniel reached for his phone. It was time to test something. He texted Brooke. "Hey babe, thinking of surprising you at work for lunch. Want to grab something together?" Minutes passed. Then a reply. "Oh, I wish, but we have a working lunch with the regional team, maybe tonight." A lie. A clean, smooth lie. Daniel stared at the screen, his fingers trembling, but not from sadness, from rage. She had no idea he was parked just across the street, watching her laugh inside the glass building with the man who destroyed their marriage. But Daniel wasn't done. He had one more stop. He pulled out a flash drive. Inside it were the screenshots, the emails, the video footage, all labeled, organized, time-stamped. He entered a print shop and asked for a discreet binder to be made. Nothing fancy, just clean and undeniable. He labeled it Brooke Taylor, confidential evidence. The clerk handed it to him without question, and Daniel felt it. His plan was taking form, but he still needed one last piece, one final blow. That night, over dinner, Brooke talked about her long meetings. Daniel nodded, pretending to be exhausted. They clinked wine glasses. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, because this was the last peaceful night she would have in a long, long time. And tomorrow, the trap would spring. The next morning, Daniel woke up too early. He hadn't really slept, his body had been still, but his mind had been racing all night. He stared at the ceiling, listening to Brooke's soft breathing beside him. How could she sleep so peacefully, knowing what she was doing to their family? Daniel quietly got out of bed. He brewed coffee. He sat at the table, staring at the manila folder that held the binder. It was real. This wasn't a nightmare. His wife was cheating. His marriage was falling apart, and yet, he hadn't told a soul, not even his best friend, Marcus, who had been there for Daniel through college, through their wedding, through the birth of their son, Caleb. But today, Daniel wasn't hiding anymore. He was ready. At 9:03 a.m., he called Marcus. It rang once before he picked up. "Yo, you okay? You never call this early." Daniel's voice cracked. "No, I'm not okay. Man, I need you." Marcus didn't ask questions. "Where?" Daniel gave him the address of a small diner near his office. 10 minutes. Marcus said. By 9:18, Daniel was sitting across from Marcus in a red booth, coffee untouched. He slid the binder across the table. Marcus opened it. 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages. Then he stopped. He looked up. "Brooke?" Daniel nodded. Marcus leaned back in disbelief. "You're telling me this guy, Chase, the pretty boy from the startup, is sleeping with your wife?" Daniel didn't speak. He just sipped his coffee. Marcus swore under his breath. Daniel looked at him, voice steady. "I'm going to her work today. I'm done playing nice." Marcus blinked. "Are you going to confront her?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm going to confront both of them." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "I'm coming with you." By 10:15 a.m., they were parked outside the office building. Daniel's heart was pounding. He had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times, but now that it was real, his hands trembled. He checked his phone. Brooke had messaged him just minutes earlier. "Crazy morning already. Love you." Face blowing a kiss. The audacity made him feel sick. He grabbed the binder, checked the hidden camera on his jacket. It was rolling. Marcus looked at him one last time. "You sure about this?" Daniel nodded. "Let's end this." They entered the building, rode the elevator in silence. Daniel's pulse was deafening. At 10:23 a.m., the elevator doors opened on the 8th floor. The main office was busy, laughter, typing, phones ringing. Daniel stepped out, scanned the room, and there she was, Brooke at the corner table smiling, sitting directly across from Chase. Their hands were almost touching. The sight hit Daniel like a punch to the chest, but he didn't flinch. He walked toward them, one step then another. People started to notice. Heads turned. Brooke looked up, confused. Then her face drained of color. "Daniel?" she whispered. Chase turned too. His smile vanished. Daniel placed the binder gently on the table between them, his voice calm. "Why don't you both explain what's inside this?" The entire office froze. Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Daniel leaned in, his voice cold. "Smile for the camera." The office was dead silent. No one dared to move. No one knew what to say. Daniel's voice still echoed in the air like thunder after a storm. Brooke stared at the binder on the table. Her lips trembled. Her hands were frozen midair, just inches from Chase. She didn't even try to open it. She knew exactly what was inside. Chase leaned back, pale as a ghost. He glanced around the office, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes watching him. The open floor plan meant there was no privacy, there was nowhere to hide. Daniel didn't blink. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. His silence was more terrifying than if he had exploded. Brooke finally stood up, she whispered. Daniel, please, let's talk about this privately. Daniel stepped back. Eyes cold. Privately? He said, you were doing everything but private when you took our marriage and flushed it down the toilet. He turned to Chase. You knew she was married. You knew we had a son. Chase opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't form a sentence. The guilt was written all over his face. Daniel, I made a mistake, Brooke finally said. Reaching for his arm, he pulled away. No, he said firmly, you made choices. Behind them, co-workers began to slowly pretend to go back to work. But everyone was still watching. Phones were being held under desks. Videos were probably being recorded. Whispers buzzed like static. Marcus stepped closer, standing just behind Daniel. His presence felt like a shield. Daniel's eyes didn't leave Brooke's. How long has it been going on? She didn't answer. He asked again. Louder. Brooke finally admitted. A few months. Daniel laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. Wow, he said. All those late nights, all those... I'm just finishing up a project. Texts, all those empty kisses when you came home. She wiped a tear from her cheek. I didn't mean to fall for him. Daniel's face hardened. But you did, didn't you? She looked away. Chase finally spoke. I'm sorry, man. Daniel cut him off. Save it. You'll be lucky if all you get is fired. He turned to Brooke. I'm picking Caleb up from school today. You can pack your things while I'm gone. Don't be there when I get back. Brooke gasped. Daniel, please, we can fix this. Daniel shook his head. Maybe I could have forgiven a mistake, but this... You betrayed our vows, our son, our life. He glanced at Chase. And you helped her do it. He picked up the binder, turned, and walked away. Marcus followed him. Brooke stood frozen. Chase sat, stunned. The whole office was suffocating in silence. When Daniel stepped out of the building, the air hit him like a wave, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. The storm had hit, but it wasn't over yet. Daniel parked his car outside Caleb's elementary school. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly. His knuckles turned white. He stared at the dashboard clock, heart pounding faster with each second. He wasn't ready, not for this. The final school bell rang moments later. The playground gate opened, and kids began pouring out like a wave. Laughter, backpacks bouncing, parents greeting their children with hugs. And then he saw him, Caleb, his son, his everything. 7 years old, wearing his favorite red hoodie, a big smile on his face as he spotted Daniel. He ran toward the car, waving excitedly. Dad. Daniel forced a smile. He opened the door, and Caleb jumped in. Guess what? Caleb said, I got a gold star in reading today. Daniel's throat tightened. That's awesome, buddy. He managed. I'm really proud of you. They drove in silence for a minute. Caleb kicked his feet against the seat. Are we going home? He asked. Daniel stared ahead. No. Champ, we're going to Grandpa's for a bit. Why? Where's Mom? Daniel's fingers clenched the wheel again. She needs some time alone, he said carefully, but everything's okay. We just need to talk for a bit. Caleb frowned. Did I do something wrong? Daniel's heart shattered. He immediately pulled the car over, turned to his son. No, hey. No. Buddy, you didn't do anything wrong. This has nothing to do with you. Okay? Caleb looked down. His small voice asked, Then why do you look so sad? Daniel blinked fast. He didn't want to cry in front of him, not now. He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes hurt people, even the people they love. Caleb was quiet. You mean Mom? Daniel hesitated. Yes, he said softly. Caleb looked out the window. He didn't ask any more questions, but Daniel knew his son was thinking hard. They arrived at Grandpa's house. Daniel's dad, Edward, was waiting at the porch. He opened the door with a concerned look. Daniel gave him a small nod. Edward took Caleb inside. I've got a new puzzle for us, he said. Smiling, Caleb's eyes lit up. Cool. Daniel stayed outside. He sat on the porch steps, head in hands. He felt like the entire world had collapsed on his back, and worst of all, he didn't know how to protect his son from it. He looked up at the sky. Clouds were gathering. A storm was coming, but this time, it wasn't about Brooke, it was about Caleb, because now, Daniel had a choice: to let the pain destroy him or to become stronger. For his son. And he knew no matter what Brooke had done, no matter how broken his heart was, he still had a reason to fight, and that reason had just walked inside with a puzzle in his hands. Daniel sat on the edge of the guest bed at his father's house. It was past midnight. The house was silent, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. He stared at his phone. Brooke had called 12 times, left 7 voice messages, each one sounding more desperate than the last. Daniel, please, talk to me. I made a mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you. It wasn't serious. It only happened twice. Don't ruin our family. Think of Caleb. He thought of Caleb every second. That's the only reason he hadn't done anything crazy yet. Suddenly, his phone lit up again. A new message from Nathan. Daniel froze. He hadn't blocked him yet. The preview showed only one line. I didn't mean for you to find out like that. Daniel let out a breath, almost a laugh, but it was bitter. He didn't need apologies from a coward. He stood up, walked downstairs, found his father still awake in the kitchen. Edward looked up from his mug of tea. You okay? Daniel nodded slowly. I need to talk to her. Edward raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Daniel nodded again, but his eyes were clear, sharp. He wasn't going back. He just needed closure. 15 minutes later, he stood in the doorway of the house that used to feel like home. Brooke opened the door with puffy eyes. Her makeup had smudged. She looked 10 years older. Daniel? He didn't speak, just walked past her into the living room. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. She followed him, wringing her hands. I don't know what to say. Daniel turned slowly, then don't say anything. She paused. I messed up, but I never stopped loving you. Daniel looked her in the eye. Love? You threw that away in a cheap hotel room. She flinched. I was lonely. You were always working. I needed someone to talk to. You mean someone to sleep with? His voice was cold, calm, too calm. She broke down crying. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Daniel shook his head. It meant everything to me. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the wedding ring, laid it gently on the table. I'm filing for divorce. Brooke gasped. No. No. Please don't do this. He didn't flinch. You didn't just break my heart. You broke our son's world. She covered her face, sobbing. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose Caleb. Daniel turned toward the door. You lost us the moment you stopped being honest. He walked out without another word. The cold night air hit his face, but it felt freeing, like a fresh breath after drowning. Back at Edward's house, he peeked into Caleb's room. His son was asleep, safe, peaceful. Daniel sat on the floor beside the bed, whispered, I'll never let anyone hurt you again. The storm was over, not without scars, but Daniel knew. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning.